Um, First, there are several of you who are new to the HR community of practice. So to those of you, welcome. I am Gwyneth Permar. I'm Director for Projects and Strategic Initiatives in UW-HR. I also want to give a special welcome to Michelle Sutton, who has joined us for our first presentation. She's Assistant Director for Academic Services at the Graduate School. And also a welcome to our two campuses, graduate program coordinators and our graduate program assistants. We hope that this meeting will be valuable to you. So I'm going to share the agenda. So first, we're going to hear from Seth Greenfest, who most of you know already. He's the Senior HR Policy and Legislation Analyst in UW-HR. He and Michelle will be delivering a presentation on ASE time off tracking and best practices for ASE hires. We're then going to get an update on the temp rule changes from Marissa Groudens, who's the Executive Director for HR Policy and Workforce Strategy. And what we do in this meeting is we hold questions until the end. So during the meeting, go ahead and put them in chat. And with what time we have remaining, we'll do a Q&A with Hannah Barnett. Thank you so much, Hannah, as always. And you can put them in the chat, or you can feel free to wait and ask your questions at the end. The meeting is being recorded, and the PowerPoint will be shared after the meeting, so you don't have to worry about taking a million notes. I think that's everything. Unless anybody has any questions, I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic to Seth and Michelle.
Thank you, Gwyneth. We're going to talk today about ASE time off tracking and best practices for ASE hires. We've been planning for the implementation of this related to the contract changes that the union agreed to last May. So I just wanted to start by sharing two things. We're talking about time off tracking for ASEs, and just keep that in mind. And the format today is Michelle's going to give an overview of some contract provisions, and then it'll shift back to me where I'll talk about the specific changes related to time off tracking.
Good morning, everybody. So this might be a little bit of a recap for a lot of you, but just to give some context for those of you who are less familiar with the contract leave provisions, we're talking specifically about a 50% assistantship appointed for a duration of 9 months, which does account for a large majority of appointments on campus. And the following leave provisions are included for those appointments. Per Article 10 of the contract, they are entitled to university official holidays and one personal holiday. Per Article 32, 20 hours of vacation time per academic quarter. And per Article 17 of the contract, ASEs are entitled to 28 total hours of sick time off or 7 4-hour work days. For those of you who appoint ASEs for a full 12 months, including the summer quarter, those folks receive 80 vacation hours total over the course of the year, but the number of sick hours don't change. They're only prorated up or down based on the total FTE. So for any appointments that are less than 50% FTE, or if they're shorter than an academic year in length, these provisions are going to be prorated. You will need to reference the contract for specific details based on the nature of the appointment. But we want you to keep in mind that the FTE and the total length of appointment for ASEs are the two factors that drive both total leave allotment as well as workload expectations. So historically, the university hasn't tracked time off for ASEs in any official way, and the contract itself wasn't initially designed with language in mind to account for tracking time off. Most of you know that the UAW contract outlines a workload expectation of 220 hours per quarter for a standard 50% appointment that lasts all 6 pay periods of the quarter. But if you do the math, you're actually going to find that 220 hours doesn't actually come out to 20 hours of work per week. So this calculation, it accounts for the existing time off that's provided to ASEs that doesn't count toward the workload expectation. So like vacation time off, holidays, The workload expectation for ASCs that are appointed at any other FTE are going to be derived from this 220-hour designation for 50% ASCs. Keeping this in mind is important for a lot of reasons, including understanding the time off for ASCs and how the tracking is going to be operationalized. So we are moving away from this existing model of not tracking time off for ASCs and work days for most leave types. And I'm going to pass it off to Seth now to provide some additional context for the shift.
Thanks, Michelle. And on the next slide, I have a summary of our rationale for proposing these changes to the union or the negotiations in the last cycle. And there were three main things. It was unclear, pardon me, when time offs were awarded or how to prorate them. The contract was just said that they were to be prorated. And as those of you who have worked with ASCs over the years, this lack of clarity, lack of consistency led to things like lack of consistency, and was concerning from the perspective of equity. We didn't know how much time off ASCs were actually getting, and then there could be variation between departments or even students within a department, but we just didn't know. And so the solution here was to specify when time offs are awarded and how to prorate them. In the next row, I focus on how time offs were not tracked in Workday, and this had the effect of this is that from an institutional level, we don't know anything about their use, and the solution here is to have the salaried ASCs request time off via department procedures and track them in Workday. And then finally, PFML wasn't a thing. Paid family medical leave wasn't a state program when the contract was first written. But of course, now we do have that. And with staff being able to use accrued or awarded time off as supplemental benefits, and the fact that we weren't tracking these in Workday means that our reporting to ESD would be affected, the Employment Security Department. And as a solution for this, we're configuring Workday to track those supplemental benefits, and associated reports will be updated. Over the next couple of slides, I'm going to talk about the specific changes. The description that Michelle was giving helped point this out, that the overall eligibility and amounts of the awards did not change. The ASCs did agree to request time off using departmental procedures and to track it in Workday. This is going live effective September 16th of this year, 2022, and it covers the personal holidays, and sick time off. Vacation time off is still part of the contract, but we're going to have to address that tracking at a future date. So we're focusing really today on the personal holidays and sick time off. So in these next couple of slides, I'm diving in a little bit deeper on how Workday will actually award these time offs. So for the personal holiday, based on the eligibility criteria that Michelle described, the system's going to check for eligible salaried ASCs in the time period between 9/16 and 10/1, and then award that personal holiday based on FTE. It's not going to do any adjustments if the FTE changes during the academic year, because the eligibility is tied to a really specific criteria. If that if the appointment's not in by the appropriate deadlines and Workday doesn't see the appointment on October 1, but the ASC is eligible for the personal holiday, the department will need to submit a ISC help ticket to get that corrected. For sick time off, salaried ASCs with a 50% appointment for the academic year or longer are going to be awarded 28 hours on the effective date of the appointment. One thing that I wanted to mention before, but I forgot, but is sick time off is a good place to mention it, and why we're front loading it is another thing that I think we've learned over the last couple of years is the importance of people using sick time, taking time off when they're sick. And so because of that, that's part of the rationale that we took for front loading this. This will be prorated based on FTE, as Michelle was describing. So some ASCs have higher than a 50% appointment, and so they get a prorated amount higher than 28 hours, slightly higher. If the salaried ASC is terminated and rehired within the academic year, the way the workday works, they'll get awarded another 28 hours, prorated appropriately when they're rehired. And so now they'll have potentially double the amount that they're supposed to. And so this also would require a manual fix by ISC, and the department should submit a help ticket on this as well. I'm going to talk a little bit more about how to avoid some of those issues. So in terms of what the department is responsible for, in a general sense, this all relies on departments appropriately managing appointment start and end dates, which means entering appointments on time per ISC and benefits deadlines, with start dates and end dates that align with the offer letter. And if it's unclear about how a position might change, still entering it for a 9-month duration, and then track terminations or job changes as needed. And Michelle will probably touch on this as well, but these are not new concepts necessarily. Part of what we're trying to do today is remind people and also link up a couple different things that tie to this job management. Salaried ASCs also have responsibilities here, and I think it's important for us to say that, and they are aware of it. It came out, well, the people who were involved in the contract negotiations, we did talk about this, and we're doing more communication with them, but they're responsible for understanding when and how to request and track time off and workday. And there's the ISC user guides, which will be updated as needed to reflect the contract. And UW-HR, myself, Michelle, Helene, and Labor Relations, Joy and Jennifer Malahan have developed a number of resources for both students, for ASCs and departments. We'll be publishing a web page, FAQs, and some one-page guidance documents. Those are not up as of yet, but we're this close. And as soon as those are posted, I'll put a message on Teams to let you all know. A little bit more guidance for departments. This comes out of some feedback I got in conversations I had last winter with departments about how soup org structures work. And the good thing is, I think that the good news is current soup org structures and Workday are set up to manage the time off tracking, the requests and the approvals that will be needed. So the time and absence initiate and approver roles already exist for the soup orgs, and there's multiple roles that can approve requests. This is also important for the ASC's perspective, because during our conversation with them, they had a lot of concerns about how this process would work and who would be really approving the requests. I think it's important that departments communicate their policies and procedures for requesting time off and ensuring that those approvals are processed. And we're going to be doing another presentation at the August 9th Workday Community of Practice meeting. And Joy and I will also be hosting a couple office hours in August and September, dates to be determined, where you all can drop in and ask questions. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about time off tracking for each of the types. And so first we have holidays, which are covered in Article 10. And so these are holidays during the academic quarter when the ASC is a salaried ASC. Use of holidays does not offset the workload expectation. And the ASC themselves can follow the holiday taken time off quick guide. And as I think we all know, these are automatically approved in Workday, but departments will need to ensure the entry of the holiday taken time off to avoid the holiday credit where it should not be awarded. For the personal holiday, also in Article 10, and this also does not offset the workload expectation. The ASC would request this for the day. It's really hours that they select to use as personal holiday. they'll follow the using your personal holiday ISC guide. And then to reiterate, the department will need to enter the appointment by the 9/16 or 10/1 campus approval deadline. The end employment date will need to match the appointment letter. And then if there's job changes during the academic year, they should be transacted as job changes. And then sick time off. This does offset the workload expectation. The salary AHC should use this, should track time off when they need to miss a scheduled work activity for a reason listed in Article 17, unless they can shift the work activities to a different time. And if they are going to use the sick time off, they would follow the enter absence time off guidance. And the department's responsibilities here mirror that for the personal holiday on the previous slide, entering the appointment by the appropriate campus approval deadlines with an end employment date that matches the letter, and then to transact terminations or job changes as needed. Sick time off is actually one of the areas that we had the most discussion with the union about. Part of the questioning was, how do I know if I need to take sick time off? And that scheduled work activity concept, I think, helps here. And this is something that we go into a little bit more detail in our FAQs as well. But these examples, and these examples actually are what we're using. So if a TA is leading, a teaching assistant is leading a session on Monday and Wednesday, that's a scheduled work activity. They have a personal illness and they're pretty sure they're going to be out Monday through Friday. Well, they would request sick time off for Monday and Wednesday for those scheduled work activities that they're going to miss. But in this second example, they're planning on grading papers. It's not a scheduled work activity because they chose the time that they would do it. But they also schedule a doctor's appointment at that time. And so they decide, okay, I'm just going to grade papers an hour later after I get back from my doctor's appointment. And so in that case, they wouldn't need to request this sick time off and track it in Workday because they're going to grade at a different time. And it's back to Michelle at this point to provide more info about best practices for ASC hires.
Okay, so just going to be sharing a bit of some important reminders about those best hiring practices, especially because they are tied to time off in a lot of ways. So first, with regard to appointment dates that you're using in Workday, please use full pay period dates for all salaried ASC appointments. This goes for both the start date as well as the end date of the appointment. A common mistake that we see with departments, especially when it comes to hiring TAs and pre-doc instructors, is hiring based on the instructional dates only, but doing this doesn't align the ASE with that 220-hour workload requirement. So just because a job begins on September 16 doesn't necessarily mean the ASE needs to be reporting for duty that day. Sometimes that day ends up being on a weekend, and that's okay too. And there is also language in the contract in Article 35 that acknowledges that workload might extend beyond the actual dates of the appointment. So it's all accounted for in the agreement already. Please use those full pay period dates. Another reason that it's important to use those dates beyond just calculating the accurate workload expectations is that this data also drives the student's eligibility for tuition waivers as well as the GAPE insurance eligibility. So these systems that the benefits office uses, that the student database uses, are going to be less likely to experience data syncing errors when appointments are based on full pay periods. In fact, if you were to appoint a student for less than 5 full pay periods of an academic quarter, even if the job is 50%, they will not read as eligible for these benefits. And then, as Seth mentioned, early entry of these appointments, especially at the start of the academic year, is going to be really important. It's important for a lot of other reasons, in addition to ensuring that proper time off is loaded into Workday. It also helps the benefits office confirm that GAPE eligibility in a timely manner at the start of the quarter. It minimizes interruptions to the tuition waiver interface between Workday and the student database. Both of these two offices are very, very overloaded with call volume at the start of academic quarters coming from both students and staff. So having these things done early really helps to minimize that volume. Along the same lines, if you can appoint the ASCs who do have guaranteed funding for the full academic year all at once, and then process lateral moves or transfers as appropriate on a quarter-to-quarter basis, that's also going to help minimize those interruptions to coverage. And then we're going to close out finally with some reminders and considerations for when ASCs may specifically be taking longer periods of leave and or using the PFML benefit through the state. So when we say extended leave for ASCs, we're talking about leaves that wouldn't allow an ASC to meet the workload expectation of an appointment in a given quarter or quarters. These situations can be pretty complex, and they almost always need to be assessed on a case-by-case basis, depending on the individual student, the timing of the leave, and other considerations. So for salaried ASCs that are appointed at 50% for the academic year, Article 17 of the contract allows up to 12 weeks of university paid GAPE coverage while the ASC is taking eligible unpaid sick time off. Additional processes are going to vary based on a student deciding to either stay enrolled or not during that period. Whether a student decides to enroll or not is almost always going to depend on the timing of the leave, because as we mentioned with appointment dates, there's minimum requirements that a student needs to meet in order to qualify for tuition coverage in a quarter. So the hiring department will operationalize the leave time and workday for these circumstances, but students do also need to be coordinating with their academic department, if that is a different department, to notify appropriate advisors, et cetera, about requesting academic leave, other procedures that they need to undertake. Our office, the Office of Fellowships and Awards in the Graduate School, we can assist you all with questions that you have about ASCs taking extended leave, but we will typically refer students back to you because they need to be coordinating with you and with their academic department in order to ensure that everybody is looped in on their plans and that people know what activity and what procedures need to be followed in Workday to record that time off.
I unmuted myself. So for tracking time off for approved FMLA and Family Medical Leave Act and paid family medical leaves, the Workday implementation that we're doing for the tracking the time off also includes billing tracking time off for an ASC on approved FMLA or PFML leave. And so this means that the ASCs can and should follow the process for these leaves that we have for other staff. And high level overview is that they submit the leave of absence request in Workday, complete and submit necessary forms to UW HR for review. And if they're approved, UW HR notifies the department and the absence office partner places the ASC on an approved leave. At that point, they have access to the time off as for PFML, a supplemental benefit. There's a separate process where they apply for PFML through the Employment Security Department. These procedures are all described on UWHR's paid family medical leave website. The general takeaway here is that we think this is going to be an improvement, really, where we can use these same procedures for the salaried ASCs. And so that's our presentation. And I realized that we didn't have a conclusion slide with our contact information, but we can definitely share that information. And I look forward to answering your questions when we get to the Q&A part of the meeting.
And Seth, when I send the presentation, I can also include your contact information, Michelle's. And I thought that Hannah, Michelle, and Seth, if you don't mind changing it up a little bit, I want to be sensitive to those of you who may not need to get the information from the next presentation. I know that we've got a lot of questions specific to this one that we might be able to get through, and I want to respect Michelle's time as well. So what we can do, it is 10:56 now. If we want to spend about 10 or 12 minutes, Hannah, seeing what we can get through while we've got Michelle here at the meeting, would that work for you?
I'm ready to go.
Great.
Wonderful. I'll just kind of roll down the questions and see how many we can get through, guys. Our first question is, sometimes National Research Service Award trainees have different paid and unpaid leave allowances. Will that be reflected in Workday?
So our answer to that is that that would probably not be something that would be reflected in Workday. Trainees, those appointments don't count toward the PFML benefit. And because these awards are not managed through, this is coming from outside external funding, these leave provisions, they should continue to be managed outside of the Workday system. That would be my kind of initial response to that question.
Thank you. I heard some feedback that I'm hard to hear, so I'll work on that after I ask this next question. Will there be a report to audit ASC absence balance hours so we can determine if a ticket does need to be submitted to the ISC for manual corrections or updates?
Yes.
Great.
Shortest answer ever.
Love it. Is aligning with the pay period dates also for hourly ASCs?
No, that best practice would be just for the salaried ASCs.
Thank you. How does this pay period requirement affect our foreign student employees that often need appointments to end before the date at the end of the quarter? For example, an F1 status ends on 6/10, so they can't work through 6/15.
This is a good question. I would say in these types of circumstances, we do always want to defer to the any visa requirements. We want to make sure that international students are in compliance. And so in particular situations where there is a specific need to end the appointment sooner, you can certainly do so. And you'll want to just ensure in terms of meeting the workload expectation that the student's workload expectation is adjusted accordingly.
When do you recommend entering appointments for a fall quarter start date for an ASC? Should they be starting now?
I don't have a perspective on that.
It may depend on what types of employment some of these students have going on this summer. So many people are, in circumstances where students are hired at 100% FTE, and there's going to be some necessary shifts that are going to need to be happening. The general recommendation in conversation that we've had with the benefits office is that if we can really get appointments in and finalize ideally as they're starting with that September 16 start date, if that is the case for an autumn appointment, that's an ideal time. We know that might not be totally feasible for a lot of people to get autumn appointment entry totally squared away. And so if, keeping in mind that the ISC is often overloaded in autumn quarter, we would say probably that that time frame of trying to get things entered by late August, very early September might be a good guideline.
Thank you. How does CPT work into the new process? Will there be no effect since the appointments will be greater than 50%?
I don't know what CPT stands for.
I'm not sure either. Sorry, Cindy. If Cindy is still here, can you share that with us?
I think she's referring to curricular practical training for international students. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, CPT, that it's my understanding that the students can be working either at UW or at other places with CPT. So you know, I think it would depend totally on how the student is appointed. I don't think with CPT that students are always necessarily appointed in an ASE job. They may be appointed in an ASE job and working over the standard allowance that international students can work, but you would just need to refer to the contract. So, you know, for example, the sick leave is prorated to an extent for folks who are working more than 50% FTE. So there are some implications just based on the nature of the appointment, but for the most part, I would not think it would operate any differently if they are appointed as an ASE.
Thank you. If either of you can provide input on this, that would be great. When we try to set up September to September appointments and work days, sometimes the ISC pushes back. Do you have any insights on if that will continue to be the case?
I think I can probably jump in. This is Chris from the ISC.
Hey, Chris.
We don't send anything back for that would be a year if it's hourly. The salaried typically follow the quarter based on the requirements. So maybe more details would be helpful. So whoever asked that could email ISC help and we can, with more details, we look into it.
Great, thank you. Moving on, will there be information on how time off is or is not applied for students receiving stipends and therefore have less than a 50% FTE or no FTE?
So I'm not sure if that maybe connects to the question that we had about the NERSA trainees as well, in that, you know, just as a reminder, stipend-based appointments are not considered wages worked or employments, and so they are not stipulated to the same workload expectations as your traditional, your TA, RA, SAs, your pre-doc instructors.
Thank you. What do we need to know about a student who holds two different appointments simultaneously? For example, two 25% FTE appointments totaling 50%. What if the two appointments are in the same department or different departments?
We didn't discuss this specifically with ISC, but I will verify it. But my hunch is that it's the same for you know, professional staff position where they hold an FTE in more than one unit, where overall the time off would be awarded individually based on the two appointments, and the ASC would have access to both of those in Workday.
Thank you. For those with a full year appointment, will the vacation hours for the entire year be available to them from the start, or are they allocated quarter by quarter?
So the contract does have the vacation time off to be awarded on a quarterly basis, but just to be a little bit more explicit, because I mentioned that we're not implementing the vacation time off tracking for September 16th. So there won't be an award of it in Workday. You won't see that starting in September. We have a couple other things to work out with that. If an ASC is going on PFML and elects to use it as a supplemental benefit, at that point, the department would do a help ticket to have those loaded into Workday. But unlike the sick time and the personal holiday, those won't be loaded in at the start of this implementation of September. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me. Which won't do any good for anybody else in here. Will there be new ASC appointment letter templates? And if so, how soon can we expect them so they can start that process?
So that is a good question. Those are coordinated and updated through labor relations, and we will need to check in with labor relations to verify a timeline for when we might be able to expect some official template language. Feel free in the meantime to add your own language based around some of the handouts and guidelines and FAQs that we're going to be sharing, and we'll work with them to figure out when there might be an updated template to reference.
Thank you. For those students that still want to work on holidays, how does holiday time off work?
I think the contract talks to this. I can't remember off the top of my head, but they're not tracking time. So there's a disconnect there. If they work on Labor Day or whatever it is, then they've worked that day, but they still would need to track the holiday time is taken. They're not getting holiday pay or holiday credit or anything like that.
For students on 100% FTE for the summer, are there time off hours prorated in an upward direction as well?
The sick time off is prorated up. The others are, and so anything else is just the 50% max is what they get.
Thank you. Gwyneth, how are we for time?
I think we only have a couple minutes left, but I've captured a few remaining questions. So anything we don't get to, I can start a conversation for questions and answers on the topic in Teams. So maybe let's see how we are after one more question.
Sounds good. Eric asks, for TAs who are given offers quarterly, should we just enter for the whole academic year and change the appointments and workday as the quarters go by? Or should they still enter the appointments quarter to quarter as we have them?
If the student hasn't been guaranteed a full year of academic funding, you should only appoint on a quarter by quarter basis. You don't want to appoint beyond, because that could potentially be locking the department into a binding agreement with the student. So, and it also does have an impact on whether or not they qualify for things like the personal holiday. So, if it hasn't been clear either in an offer letter of admission that a student has guaranteed funding for a certain number of years, and it includes that time period, if it's only that students are being hired on an ad hoc basis, you should stick to just doing quarterly appointments.
Thank you.
Thank you to both of you for answering so many questions. I hope that was helpful for everyone. And for those of you who were here for that presentation only, feel free to have the gift of time and log off. And for those of you who are also here to get Marissa's update on changes to temp rules, please feel free to stick around for that. Hi, Marissa.
Hi, Gwyneth. Hi, everyone. Hi, I'm Marissa, and I'm going to provide an update on temporary hourly employees transitioning to non-permanent employment. These slides are going to look somewhat familiar because since our last update, there hasn't been a ton of movement on the bargaining side. So Gwyneth, go ahead and advance the slide. Where we are at is that 7/1 rolled around, July 1, which was the date that the new state civil service rule defining temporary employment took effect. And that's the one that jettisoned the 1,050-hour rule that we have known for 2 decades, and it has replaced it with the single lifetime temporary appointment rule that puts in limits of 1,050 hours or 12 months, whichever comes first. So since all of our temporary hourly employees and classified titles, or classified like, I should say titles, are still in their temporary jobs, we are restarting their count, their once in a lifetime opportunity. And we're doing that by resetting their original temporary employment date. That work is in progress. We're working with that ISC to load the appropriate dates on the right people at the right time. And the hours tracking will continue, but it's continuing over here in HR. That work is in progress. Why it's relevant is if you do go into Workday and go look at that custom object and that additional data tab on the worker and look at that date, it is not yet reset. So you will see it reset to July 1, but not quite yet. I've been working with some of my colleagues this week, thank them, to get a communication out to current temporary hourly employees. There are two flavors of this communication. The first is to those in certain groups that will transition on August 1st, and I'll talk about which groups those are on the next slide. And the second version is to the other ones. We're not ready to transition yet, and they have a different flavor of the communication that says we're tracking your hours, and you have a new definition of temporary employment. We are, oh, go ahead on back, Gwyneth. We are still working on that data collection from me, from Seth, from Gwyneth, and others helping with this work. Big thank you to the units that have completed the data collection for their areas. Well, I'm not going to spoil the fun. There's a pie chart talking about how far along we are, but we are still collecting the data on how to transition temporary hourly employees. And that work for the group transitioning on August 1st ends July 31st. And that is also when we'll stop using the temporary subtype for that group that's transitioning. Okay. And then we'll transition the first group prior to August 15th, the second group at a time to be determined. So that's all because of bargaining. And Gwyneth, now you can advance the slide. Where are we with bargaining? Where we were at before. So we have concluded bargaining with the Federation. We have concluded with SEIU 1199. So those two unions, along with anybody transitioning to classified non-union employment, those groups will transition August 1st, 2022. So in terms of our data collection and getting all of that information answered, we're definitely laser focused on making sure we have all of that information collected for those groups because they are transitioning by August 1st. We are not yet done with bargaining with SEIU 925. We are not done with WSNA, and we are not done with Inland Boatmen's Union. So to the question, will this be included, like who's transitioning? They will get a custom message depending on which group they're in. One group, meaning the 925 and the Boatmen's Union WSNA group, will say, that kind of really not even talk about non-permanent employment. It'll talk about their new temporary employment rules, and that message also will be sent to the unions. The other group that will transition on at 8-1 will be directed to information about non-permanent employment and say that we're collecting information and provide them with some additional information about the new provisions that they get as a non-permanent employee. So that's where we're at in terms of transition. The next slide, I've actually already spoken to it, Gwyneth, but we're says WSNA is not transitioning yet. So where we're at, it's not on that slide, is that we do have bargaining scheduled at the end of the month with 925. They are definitely not going to head on August 1, and the same with WSNA. I think we meet with them next week. Inland Boatmen's Union is a bit of a ways further down, I believe, that path. So our drop dead for understanding whether or not 925 or WSNA could transition by 9-1 is at the end of this month. So more to come on that. We are keeping our webpage up to date on that status. In terms of data collection, here's where we're at. It's actually better. So Seth, I see you smiling. Seth sent me data this morning and said, you're second day in a row, we're above 50% collected. This is done a couple days ago. So we're just half the pie is collected, and we've collected for CNUs and SEIU 95 the most. And honestly, we don't have on campus that many temporary hourlies in the Federation anyway, but we're about halfway done. That's the way to read this slide. The next slide tells us, what are we mapping to? So of those collected, what are all these temporary hourly employees turning into? And 50-50 is kind of a way to look at this, is that half are moving into the intermittent employment type where there is no end date and they're sporadically working. And the other half are moving into non-permanent hourly, where they continue to be paid hourly and they have an end. They're coming in for a project, doing leave of absence, backfill work, or some sort of temporary work like that. So that's what we're observing in terms of the collection. Very few are regularly scheduled, and every now and then we'll see one transition to regular less than 50%, and then they drop off our list because you guys are taking care of what needs to be done, meaning do a recruitment and things like that. So fantastic. Okay, next slide, Gwyneth. I think this is almost it. So other reminders. So temporary staff helper, we've sunset the use of that. I know there are temporary hourly employees still in that title because they're not ready to transition until 8/1. So however compensation is directing you is how to proceed with that job title. And we'll deprecate that once folks have moved out of that job profile. As a reminder, UTEMP staffing is taking care of all transition-related inquiries. All of them are transitioning to non-permanent hourly. We are transitioning all existing fixed duration appointments that are in 925 and WIFC to the non-permanent fixed duration subtype as a job change. So that is part of our cutover on 8/1. Well, I should rephrase. It'll be part of the cutover for WIFC on 8/1 and for 925 to be determined. Limited term appointments, those are the hourly paid professional staff appointments in job codes 11850 and 11855 is the new one. And their accrual changes took effect on July 1st. You have not seen that, it's in Workday, but you probably haven't seen it because they accrue at the end of the month, but you will see that at the end of July. And you may begin to use non-permanent subtypes for position creation and recruitments. So it's becoming a little challenging given the fact that unions have not concluded bargaining. So we are encouraging non-permanent subtype usage, but if you believe that they will not be moved to non-permanent in time and you're likely to complete the hire earlier, you can go ahead and work with your recruiter to hire them as a temporary hourly, and then they'll show up in the data collection tool, and you'll have to answer those questions about them. Next slide. Those are our resources. We continue to update, we continue to add resources, we continue to add FAQs. And the second bullet there, this is coming soon. It's our policy on non-permanent employment, and it's up actually as of yesterday. So it's no longer coming soon. It is there, and it summarizes in policy-like terms, non-permanent employment. It effectively at the point when everybody has transitioned out of temporary hourly employment, it'll effectively replace the temporary hourly employment program policy that we all know and love. All right, I'm ready for my questions. I saw a lot of them come in, so I couldn't catch up as they were coming in, so let me know.
Wonderful. I will just dive right in. Kimberly Mishra, our Chief of Staff, noted in the comments that she will be sending a preview of communications that are going to be going to temp hourly employees to our COP team this afternoon. And she notes also that you are welcome to share with supervisors of your temp employees. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly.